Now, it would be really wrong of me to come in and talk to you about Matariki without giving you some context about where this knowledge base comes from for me. You know, wherever I go, I start off by saying I do not know everything there is to know about Matariki. Ko nā kōrero kai au, ko nā kōrero kai au. What I have is what I have, and what I've researched and what was given to me, and that's what I'm sharing. If you have a different kōrero about Matariki 7 stars, kei te pai, hoia tō waka. Okay, I've come here in the hope that you'll respect my right to tell this version of the story. And if you have a different version, I will completely respect your right to be wrong. I will respect your right to tell your version. I do not know, there are tribal variances, there are differences. I'm just going to give you what I know and tell you where it comes from, firstly. So there was a man who came from the Ranginui region, the upper end actually. His name was Te Pikikōtuku, all the way on the other side of the island. He left his iwi. He married a woman within two wharetoa, left there, married a woman within Ngāti Maniapoto, left there, ended up in Ngāti Pikiao. He married his last wife there. It's kind of not looking good for the whakapapa, I guess. This does not come down to me. And he married his last wife, and his name was Te Pikikōtuku. Te Pikikōtuku was a tohunga whaiwhaia. Whaiwhaia he mākutu. Those of you who was a kind of a sorcerer from, I always say if he was in Harry Potter, he'd be in Slytherin. He was a sorcerer, was Te Pikikōtuku, and he was a tohunga kōkōrangi. So he was an astronomer. He had a son in Ngāti Pikiao. His name was Himiona Te Pikikōtuku. Himiona travelled to Ruatahuna and married one of our kuia. And they had this man here. This is Te Kōkau Te Pikikōtuku. And Te Kōkau had a son, his name is Rawiri Te Kōkau. So these two men were tohunga whaiwhaia and they were tohunga kōkōrangi. So they were astronomers and they were witch doctors. He mākutu ene. And they lived in Ruatahuna. And in the year 1897, Elton Best, and you all know who Elton Best is, the author of many, many writings. He turns up and interviewed these two men because he wanted their knowledge of astronomy. And he interviewed them for a couple of days, and they gave him some kōrero, and Best went off and wrote this book called Astronomical Knowledge of the Māori. I'd hazard a guess that 90% of that knowledge and astronomical knowledge of the Māori comes from these two old men. So they gave a little bit of kōrero to Best, and Best went off and wrote it down. And then he said, ka pai, he said to one of his tohunga tūtakanaho, I'm going to write their names in my book. And he said, no, you're not. He tapu, he whaiwhaia. They are witch doctors. So he struck their names from the record. So in that book, you won't see their names in the astronomical knowledge of the Māori. So what Best didn't know is, as payment for their kōrero, Best gave to these two old men an old nautical star map. It folds out probably to be about the size of that screen. It's got all the Western names and constellation stars in the sky. And he gave it to these two old men from the year 1898 until 1933. They wrote a manuscript. It's a 400-page manuscript. It's like a big old ledger, Bible. That manuscript has about 1,000 Māori star names in there with the English equivalents because they had that star map. Every star has a kōrero, why it's called what it's called, how to read it, when it rises, when it sets, what it's connected to. It has waiata, whakapapa, karaki, all connected to these different 1,000 stars. On the map, they drew 106 constellations. Every constellation has a kōrero. And they wrapped this book up, put the map inside the book, and on his deathbed, Rawiri Te Kōkau gave it to his grandson. This is in the 1930s. He's about 11 years old. He gives him this book. Now, he's a tohunga. His koroua was a tohunga. He was petrified of the reputation of his grandfather, petrified. So he took that book. In his mind, he thought to himself, I'm going to bury that book or burn it or get rid of it, he tapu. But he was too scared, so he put that book in his cupboard and it stayed there for 50 years. Then his whakaputa mohi or grandson comes along and said, "Koro, you know anything about Matariki?" And he gave me that book. So I have that book, and the vast majority of the knowledge that I'm going to share to you comes from this book. I've had that book for about 20 years, and in 20 years I've gone around as much as the country as I can, collecting data and knowledge and scraps of evidence about Māori astronomy. Much of it is in Te Reo Māori. In fact, the majority of it is actually in Waiata and Māori newspaper and karakia. It just hasn't been gone through. And speaking to people like here, people like Derek Lardali and other people who don't think they know anything, but actually when they start talking, they know so much, and the record is just growing and growing. And out of all of this stuff has come this book. This is the first publication of a whole host of astronomy publications that I'm going to put out in the next few years. On his deathbed, it's my koroua, he says to me, "Hey, taua puka puka, kaua e tuku. Don't you let that book go." He was warning me. Koinei tana ohaki. He's going to die. And he knows. He says, "Kaua e tuku. Ki te pā te ringa o tētahi ki te puka puka rā, koi mate." He was so fearful of his reputation, the reputation of his ancestors. He said, if anyone plays around with that, they might die. Kaua e tuku. I said, "Oh, ka pai. There goes any plans I have of a career in this space." Then he said to me, "Enari nā kōrero kei roto i te puka puka, me kimi I te huarahi ki a hora e rā mātauranga ki te ao." He said, you need to find a way to share that knowledge with the rest of the world. His last words to me were, knowledge that isn't shared isn't knowledge. And from that whakatauki he gave me comes this book. So this is just the first, this is the English version. So we're going to have a look at the major kōrero, I guess, that's in this book. Some of the controversy that's come out of this book. Okay, so what is Matariki? Matariki is what most of the world know as Pleiades, okay? It's probably the best recorded and most commonly, best known, I suppose, and best recorded cluster of stars in the night sky. This is a cave painting. This is 20,000 years old, this cave drawing. This comes from Waimarama Ngāti Kaununu. No, this comes from France. You see the bull, and above the shoulder of the bull you'll see this cluster. This is Pleiades. This is a 5,000-year-old star disk dug out of the ground in Germany. See the sun, here's the moon, and this is said to be Pleiades. Pleiades are what we commonly call the Seven Sisters. That is a Greek myth, okay? That is not a Māori kōrero. They are not seven sisters. Okay? That is a Greek myth. And here you see the power of colonization. We're so willing to accept Western beliefs and myths and make them Māori and disregard our traditional ones. They've never been seven sisters to the Māori. We took that on, particularly from Best. Here are the Greek names. And actually in the Greek names there are 9. Okay, they're Atlas and Pelion. Atlas is the guy that holds up the earth, you know, big muscly guy. Looks like he's from Ruatahuna. And there are their seven sisters, their 7 daughters. Zeus is a bit of a frisky guy, and he wanted them all as wives, and the parents disagreed, so they turned them into a flock of doves and put them in the sky. Pleiades means flock of doves. That's how it gets its name. Okay. Matariki is what we know as Pleiades. That's fairly much what it is. And right throughout the Pacific, right throughout Polynesia, it's the most commonly used word that these stars and group of stars are known by. So here in Aotearoa it's Matariki, in Easter Island it's Matariki, in Hawaii it's Matariki, all the way up in the Solomon Islands it's Matariki. Oh, sorry, Hawaii it's Makali'i. So they're either variations of Matariki, meaning mostly the eyes of the chief or the eyes of the god. Only in Aotearoa do we have little eyes. Okay? That's because we are following Eldson Best's translation of Matariki. That is not a Māori kōrero. There is not one scrap of evidence after 20 years of research that I can find to support little eyes.